of you. So the time is 4 o'clock. I think we can get started now. So welcome all to the first Resonate with Pair Professional Alliance of Indian Radiographers lecture series. And I'd like to welcome you all on behalf of Pair and the Society to this wonderful event, which is first of its kind. Thank you all for joining. Could one of you quickly confirm if you're able to hear the audio well? Or so we will try to keep admitting people in as they come, but uh, kindly bear with us if there's a small delay owing to the tech. So today's online lecture series has been labeled under Resonate with Pair, which is our lecture series that we intend to organize on a trimesterly basis under the banner of PAIR, which is a newly formed special interest group working very closely with the Society of Radiographers in the UK. Let me introduce you to today's speakers. We have with us today Kathryn Williamson, who's a professional officer for Education and Accreditation at the College of Radiographers. Kathryn, just a little bio about her. She's a diagnostic radiographer with over 15 years of clinical experience, having worked for both the private sector and the NHS. Her clinical specialism was mammography practice, with a particular interest in health promotion, having established the Northern Health and Society Social Care Trust program of work in this area. In 2017, she joined Ulster University as a lecturer on the undergraduate Diagnostic Radiography degree program, contributing also to the postgraduate AHP Practice Education program at Ulster. She has a passion for education, and Kathryn holds a PGCHEP, a Master's in Higher Education Practice with distinction, and a Fellowship of the Higher Education Academy. She joined the College of Radiographers, CoR, in July 2021 as a professional officer for Education and Accreditation, leading on the final drafting of the 4th edition of the Education and Career Framework, which she will be discussing about today. We are immensely happy and lucky to have you here in our midst today, Kathryn, and we are excited to be hearing from you shortly. Our second speaker today is Noel Matthew, none other than myself. So I'll be speaking about the revised standards of conduct, performance, and ethics from the HCPC. Just to give you an overview of who I am, I'm a diagnostic radiographer with over 10 years of clinical experience, having worked in the UK and also internationally. I hold a master's degree in medical imaging technology. I'm a multimodality radiographer by profession, and I also have a PGC in clinical simulation, which I completed recently. Currently, I'm a practice educator in MRI for the North Central London Imaging Academy, and I've worked based out of UCLH. So, without further ado, let me welcome Kathryn for her talk. And thank you, Kathryn, once again. And we are excited to hear from you.
Great, thank you very much, Niall. I'm just going to share my screen with you. So if you could give me a thumbs up, and I hope that you can see it. My signal hasn't been particularly good of late, so hopefully it'll hold out for the duration of this presentation. Now, how's that? Is that?
We can see it now, Kathryn.
Visible? That's great, lovely. Thank you very, very much. It's an absolute honour to be here on what is your first PAIR event, and no pressure going first. So what I want to talk through with you today is, if I can get this to move on, is a bit about just firstly what the College of Radiographers does. We're actually a separate arm from the Society, and I'm just going to briefly touch upon what we do and what our role is. Then looking into a bit of background into where we are as a profession, what the positive drivers for change have been, before then taking you into the actual purpose and content of the Education and Career Framework, and then how you can actually use that yourselves within your own career development. So, as I've said, the College of Radiographers is a separate arm to the Society. We are a registered charity, and we're very much concerned with the promotion and development of medical imaging and radiotherapy, the promotion and study and research into radiography, and the promotion of public awareness into the profession through all the work that we do. So I work alongside two other professional officers for education and accreditation at the college. We've got Dr. Laura Charlesworth and Dr. Amy Robertson. And the three of us, along with Dr. Rachel Harris, who's the current head of professional practice and education, are all involved in supporting the development of professional guidance and standards on education and research in radiography. Different stakeholders in that process across the UK and further afield. Now, there are three main products, if you like, that we oversee. The first at the top there is COR programme approval, and this includes the college approval of pre-registration degree programmes and apprenticeships, assistant practitioner programmes, and also postgraduate degree programmes and short courses. It's really through this process that education providers can apply for COR approval, and their programme gets assessed against the college's standards for that level of education. So our programme approval process also includes approval of placement sites, something which we see as being very important at the pre-registration level, really to ensure that we're protecting our learners when they're out in practice, and to ensure quality placement experiences through the benchmarking against our standards. And that's really what the purpose of programme approval is all about. It's about you know, alignment with professional body standards and encouraging innovation in education. All of this work would only be possible through the support of our external COR assessors, and I want to highlight this role with you because our College of Radiographer assessors are experienced academics but also experienced clinical staff who are SOR members, and our ability to provide this service very much relies on their input. It is a voluntary role, but it does provide you with opportunity to develop your own engagement with that education pillar of practice and development of consultancy skills, as well as networking opportunities and learning from others and sharing your expertise. So it's something for you to consider, and anybody interested can follow the link on the slides, which I'll share with you all at the end. Fill in the application form and apply. We also offer then individual accreditation for SOR members, and we have 3 active accreditation schemes in place, one for assistant practitioners, Mammography Associates, and also then Practice Educators. We also then oversee CPD Now endorsement, so this relates to the College of Radiographers badging of CPD events and study days that don't confer competence but which can show that they align with the Society and College's CPD Now outcomes and policy. And as you can imagine, all of this keeps us really busy. We engage with lots of different people, other professional bodies, our HCPC regulator, really to steer and drive the voice for radiography in any national projects or policies in the HP arena around education and training. And one of the largest pieces of work then that I had the privilege to lead on when I first started back in July 2021 was the completion and publication of the Education and Career Framework. So the framework is one of many in a long succession, I suppose you could say, and as with any long-running document, the current version has very much been influenced by everything that has gone before it, both in policy and practice. And there have been lots of different drivers for change over the last 100 years. So our professional identity as radiographers has evolved through the years, you know, from being classed as medical auxiliaries with voluntary registration with the BRMA to now radiographers with mandatory registration with the HCPC. We've seen lots of different changes in professional recognition through government legislation and policy. NHS reform has been a driver for change, as well as changes in terminology and the titles that we use within the profession and how others recognise us as well. Definitely the move to mandatory registration has driven the profession forward, and developments in education and training for the workforce and of course evolving working relationships have all brought about changes to our practice, really leading us to where we are today with opportunities to enter higher levels of practice and working beyond the scope of what a typical radiographer would be expected to do. In terms of policy, there are two key policy documents that have really had a great influence on the radiography workforce and which have fed in, sort of the legacy of these documents have fed into the current version of the Education and Career Framework. And the first is the Department of Health's report from the year 2000, and it was called Meeting the Challenge Strategy for Allied Health Professions. This document laid out the four core domains, or what we now refer to as the four pillars of practice. And it was the first policy for consultant allied health professional roles, and it detailed job descriptions to try and embed these roles into practice. It was very much done with the intention of improving outcomes for patients, providing career opportunities to help retain staff, and also recognise their contribution, as well as strengthening professional leadership within allied health professions. The second document to the right then is another Department of Health report from the year 2003, and this was around radiography skills mix. This report really highlighted the need for radiographers to progress into strategic clinical roles, the need to build the evidence base within radiography to improve patient outcomes and retain staff. And this document really saw the strengthening and embedding of the four core levels of practice. So that of assistant practitioner, practitioner, advanced and consultant practitioner from here on in. And as an organisation and professional body, we committed to this workforce model, detailing it within our education and career frameworks from 2006 onwards. And we've very much expanded upon this then within the current version of the Education and Career Framework to include many more wider roles and levels of practice, which you'll see shortly. So when we think of where we are today as a profession, all of you will be very familiar with the challenges that you face and the changes that you face on a daily basis. As a profession, we do continue to navigate the aftermath of the COVID pandemic. We know that waiting times are through the roof. We know that practice is still struggling to recover from that. And the COVID pandemic also redirected not only healthcare delivery, but how we train the workforce as well. And there's lots of learning that we can take from that. Of course, we've got challenges around retention and recruitment of staff within the workforce, and we all have to work together to address the issues around that. And as we move forward, we know that there will be advancements in technology and more changes to government policy and workforce planning, as well as changes in the health needs of the population that will require you as a workforce to be agile and adaptable in your response. And these are all the things that have really driven the most recent version of the ECF. We, as a professional body, have tried to provide a document that gives a clear vision for workforce development, for career development pathways and opportunities, and hopefully to build enthusiasm for what a career in radiography can actually hold. So the overall goal of the ECF is about improving outcomes for patients through the education and training of the workforce. So it's very much intended to be used by everybody within the profession. We hope that it will support education providers to design effective programmes. We hope that it will assist practitioners to plan their career development, and we hope that it will help managers who are responsible for workforce planning to introduce new roles into their department, as well as it being a promotional tool for the profession with our stakeholders and the public. So this is what the framework looks like, and if you've got your smartphones handy, please feel free to scan the QR code, download a copy, and you can view it as I go through different sections of it. Word of warning, it is a rather large document, so it might take a few minutes to download. And as it's a large document, there are different ways that you can navigate it. So the first is simply through the contents page. So you can click on each of these sections to be taken to exactly where you want to go. The second way that you can navigate it is using our revised version of the Education and Career Wheel. So this is an interactive infographic, and it includes the various levels of practice in the document as well as the educational expectations. And you can use the wheel to navigate the document by clicking on the coloured pins beside each of the levels of practice or role titles. Alternatively, you can navigate between sections once you're in the document by actually clicking on the colour-coded headings along the top, and all the information relating to that level or role is contained within that. So these are the section heading titles, and this is what you can find within the practitioner section. So you'll see things like an introduction to the level or the role, a brief overview of what the scope of practice looks like, the knowledge, skills and attributes associated with that role or level of practice, information about the 4 pillars of practice, and of course then the education qualifications related to that level of practice, accreditation as well if it's applicable. For the practitioner section, we do have an indicative curriculum, so this is the curriculum that all COR approved programs at pre-registration level do have to map to. And then we've got various case studies. In addition to the tabs at the top, then you've got your navigation toolbar as well that you can find at the bottom of each page. So that's just to give you a little bit of an overview of how to actually navigate the document. So back to the content. In terms of content then, I think it's important to know and to note that the framework itself has been underpinned by research, and a modified Delphi consensus study was undertaken in conjunction with staff from Sheffield Hallam University. And as part of that, an expert panel was recruited, and the panel was made up of expert practitioners from across all levels and pillars of practice, which included education, research, management and leadership roles. And the study really sought to identify, through expert agreement, the knowledge, skills and attributes, or the KSAs, required across the 4 core levels of practice, and also the associated areas of practice that will meet both the current and future needs of the radiography workforce. The study also provided some further recommendations for the framework around the need for more clarification related to role definitions, around educational requirements, as well as expectations of practice. And it identified that the refreshed framework also needed to be user-friendly, incorporating infographics and video clips to give some context and exemplars to the users. Following the outcomes of the Delphi study then, writing groups were put together, again made up of expert members of the profession as well as patient representatives, and it was the writing groups who were actually tasked with drafting the various sections of the framework. And they were given then additional freedom to add any additional knowledge, skills and attributes that maybe weren't identified in the Delphi, but which align with the national requirements of the different levels of practice. And we're very thankful for all the voluntary participation of those who took part in that, particularly our patient representatives. It's so important that we had the patient voice recognised in the framework, because the patient is at the centre of everything that we do as a workforce. So it is very much a document that's been written by the workforce for the workforce. So the Delphi study provided us with the knowledge, skills and attributes as a foundational model to work with. And why that's of value and why it's important, because when we consider role development into higher levels of practice, it's necessary to consider how this will fit with the profession overall. So how will it be supported through the development of the workforce from the lower levels of practice right the way through. And that's really what we've done in the ECF by defining the knowledge, skills and attributes associated with each level of practice. As I've said, we've included a much wider number of roles and levels of practice compared to previous iterations. We've got the 4 core levels, as well as expanding the support worker section. So we now have coverage of the clinical support worker, senior clinical support worker, mammography associate and assistant practitioner within that section. The same is applicable to the enhanced practitioner. the enhanced level of practice has been included for the first time, really a key driver for its inclusion is around the retention of the workforce through supporting understanding and development of this level of practice. And I'll be looking at this a little bit later on. As I've said, the KSAs were taken from the Delphi study. The exception to this is the enhanced level. The enhanced level of practice was a developing and emerging concept at the time of writing the ECF, and therefore it wasn't included in the Delphi study. But what we did do was draw themes and collate these based on the advice of the ECF steering group, taking into account the work of the various national frameworks from across the 4 nations to make sure that we captured a comprehensive and accurate presentation of this level of practice. So whenever you view the framework and the KSAs, you'll see some of them are highlighted in a purple font, and those are the KSAs that were directly taken from the Delphi. We've also then got additional sections around education roles, research, leadership and management roles. So another key component of the framework then is coverage of the 4 pillars of practice. So if you remember, these stem right from the year 2000, and we've kept with this model. And the reason we've done that is that these are embedded across all levels and roles within the ECF, really demonstrating the college's belief that all members of the workforce have a role and level specific contribution that they can make towards the 4 core pillars. Whenever we can do that at all levels and roles, that's going to help deliver excellence for our patients, with the goal of supporting the delivery of evidence-based practice and radiographer-led service transformation around the 4 pillars. Of course, then, the education, qualification and accreditation expectations for each level of practice have been included, and these have been carefully considered against government strategy across all 4 nations, and also looking at wider AHP workforce development. So the ECF really translates what's in existence in terms of policies and existing frameworks, but it translates that for the radiography workforce. So making sure that as a profession we are in alignment and won't be left behind from our allied health professions counterparts. So as we look across all levels of practice in the ECF, you can see that there are clear incremental expectations that have been provided in relation to education and qualifications held, right through from the support worker roles through to your consultant level of practice, really to make sure that there's clear directional guidance so that everybody at each level of practice has the appropriate underpinning education and qualifications, really to make sure that they're empowered in practice and to ensure the sustainability and growth of the profession. Really trying to build that knowledge, skills and attributes escalator as a reality for the workforce in practice. So that's an overview of the key foundational content. There are a number of slides here. Now I'm conscious of time, so I'm just going to flick through, but you can see here the example of the enhanced practitioner, what education requirements are expected and how they contribute to the 4 pillars, and some examples of these roles in practice. And you'll see the progression into then the advanced level of practice. So again, increasing autonomy, increasing educational requirements, and increasing contributions across the 4 pillars of practice as well. And again, into then the consultant level of practice. So at the forefront of the field, consultants will be leading the way, and the educational expectations around that also increase, and again their coverage and engagement with the 4 pillars as well. So that's really an overview of some of the career progression guidance and the expectations within the ECF. What is important to note is that role development into the levels of practice that we've just shared there or in setting up new roles really needs to be aligned with service need. And as the professional body, the college supports the development of new roles in alignment with the ECF and other relevant professional and statutory requirements, whereby the practitioner is appropriately educated and trained for the role and appropriate governance processes are in place, because patient safety is absolutely paramount. And typically with role progression, there is an extension being made to that practitioner's existing scope of practice, and that then carries increasing levels of clinical risk and responsibility. So role development does need to be underpinned by good clinical governance. And I hope that you're all familiar with what clinical governance is. It is the process by which NHS organisations are accountable for the continuous improvement in the quality of services they provide and in safeguarding high standards. And the three main parts of this process are quality assurance, quality improvement, and risk and incident management. So when clinical governance processes fail, we all know the consequences that we can see through the various media stories. And I've included some examples which support good governance on this slide. But from these, at a basic starting point for role development is the need to determine and define the scope of practice for the practitioner. So this should detail what the practitioner will and importantly will not do within the remit of that extended scope. Next, consideration then needs to be given to the education and training requirements associated with the responsibilities which now sit within the practitioner's new scope of practice. So are there any educational needs? What are the professional requirements and educational expectations relating to this role or new level of practice? And how best can any learning be fulfilled? Should it be formal accredited learning or informal in-house training? Of course, various other governance processes are shown here and are very much necessary too, such as having protocols and procedures in place and PII considerations. And practitioners at all levels must be engaging in regular continuing professional development, which is relevant to their role and aligned to the level of practice at which they're practicing. So, as I've said, role development or career progression is often determined by service need, and this means that as practitioners, we're maybe not particularly strategic when thinking about career planning or development. We're maybe a bit more reactive to opportunities as they come along. But strategic career planning refers to a process in which you take stock of your talents and your abilities and you evaluate your strengths, your passions, your work values, and this can help you to consider what direction you would like to go in and how you can achieve that. And having clear goals and objectives in place can help in generating the necessary motivation to get you where you want to be, ensuring that when opportunities do present themselves that you are ready and in a really good position to act and hopefully be successful. So the ECF can be used alongside other tools to assist in career planning. This might be for yourself, or maybe you support others in CPD activities. And one example is using a Johari window to help you map your qualities against how your colleagues maybe know or see you. So this is a self-reflection tool, and it can help you have a better understanding of yourself and how you're perceived. You can also use the ECF then to undertake a learning needs analysis to identify any education and training development needs that you might have, or you might want to use the ECF to map your current knowledge, skills and attributes to the KSAs contained within the ECF for your level of practice, or maybe the level above if you're hoping to progress, and that can help you to identify areas for further CPD. I've mentioned just how important it is for members of the workforce to be engaging across the four pillars, and the ECF does provide examples at the various levels of practice across the workforce, so you can use the suggestions in the ECF to reflect and again plan your development and CPD activities around the four pillars. As a profession, we have a real need to keep momentum going to build the evidence base for radiography, and the ECF can be used to support the development of research rules into practice. So this is a possible avenue of career development in practice, particularly for those at the enhanced advanced consultant levels, where we're expecting engagement in research. And within the ECF, we've got a whole section devoted to research and innovation. So this section covers all possible research roles within the profession. It gives you information on how to get into research, possible research degree options, as well as the knowledge, skills and attributes required for a researcher. And there are lots of signposting and relevant information, so very much worth checking this section out. As I've said, the document is also a promotional tool, and we've got case studies across all levels and roles within the ECF. Some of these are written and some of these are audio-video recordings, and you can use these to help give some inspiration. And we would also encourage, if you're interested in submitting a case study for the ECF, to get in touch with me. My email contact will be at the end, because we want to continually update these and keep refreshing these. So the case studies, as I've said, might provide inspiration for you as a practitioner, but it might also give suggestions for new roles in your departments, and they can be used alongside the detailed information within the various sections of the ECF to support this process by informing practitioners and radiology managers to develop new roles in practice and develop job descriptions that are relevant. So this will give information on the education and training expectations and level appropriate knowledge, skills and attributes which individuals should hold at the various levels of practice. The ECF also contains lots of links to a multitude of further sources of information that can assist you in your roles. So links to various professional guidance documents. We've got links to our own documentation on programme approvals, links to our accreditation schemes, and also a number of appendices at the end. So the appendices include a copy of the Delphi study. There's a great useful overview of radiation protection legislation for each level of practice, and also a glossary as well. So it's really important that we have clarity around role titles whenever we want to progress as a profession. Just before I wrap up, all of you will be familiar with your regulatory requirement as registered healthcare practitioners to engage in CPD activities and maintain your record of CPD. Should we be selected for audit by the HCPC, we would have to provide it for review. And CPD Now is our online CPD platform which can assist with this. It's a free member benefit for those who are members of the Society of Radiographers, and it gives you with an online repository for recording your CPD. It has a number of features in it that can assist if you're called for audit, such as generating a downloadable list of CPD activities. And it's also the platform through which CoR accreditation may be applied for if you're working as an assistant practitioner, Mammography Associate or Practice Educator. Within the platform, there are a number of useful resources which you can access, and this includes helpful information and guidance around undertaking CPD, guidance around personal development planning, and also information and recordings are available about reflective practice and meeting the requirements of HCPC audit. And that just brings me to the end. What I would say is we know that there are lots of changes and challenges that are going to continue for you as practitioners and require you to evolve in your roles, and workforce development and education and training is paramount to ensure that the workforce is agile and adaptable in its response and capable of meeting the needs of our patients and service users as we move forward. For this development to be effective, it needs to be supported through appropriate governance processes, through collaborative development of education and training provision, through service and academia working together, as well as ownership of professional development by individual practitioners such as yourselves through engaging with CPD and the 4 pillars of practice. And this has to be supported by professional policy and guidance, and that's very much what the intention of the ECF is. It's a document to be used by you. It's for you and to be used by you. So thank you very much. I'm just going to pop some links to references there within the ECF and contact details as well.
Thanks, Kathryn. Thanks very much. I think that was a very insightful talk, quite an elaborate topic, and I'm sure all our attendees have taken away much learnings from that. And am I wrong in saying that everything's also on the SOR website in case they always want to go back and have a look? It's all in there.
Right.
And
yeah,
have we got time for 2 questions, Kathryn? Or
sure, yeah.
yeah. So if you guys have any quick questions, I think we've got time for 1 or 2 questions, or else we can always have the session towards the end. So if anybody has quick 2 questions for Kathryn.
Happy to take questions at the end as well. There's a lot of information there. So
yeah, I guess so. Yeah, let's crack on then, and hopefully if you do have any questions, we can always have a look at them towards the end, or you can always email one of us if you have anything pertaining to the talks respectively. Without further ado, in that case, let me move on with my talk. So thank you all. Thanks for that. And I'll put together, my name is Noel Matthew, and I did introduce myself, but just to give you another introduction for those of you who just joined right now, a couple of minutes back, I'm an MRI practice educator working out of the NCL Imaging Academy, and I'm a director for the professional development and education of the newly formed PAIR Special Interest Group. So I've put together some excerpts from our revised HCPC Standards of Conduct, Performance and Ethics with a few examples that pertain to our daily lives as radiographers. So hopefully it helps us in our journeys. A little disclaimer as usual before I go ahead. So the content of this presentation is intended for informational and educational purposes only. While every effort has been made to ensure accuracy, this presentation does not substitute the official guidelines and documents provided by the HCPC. The attendees are encouraged to refer to the latest version of the HCPC Standards of Conduct, Performance and Ethics for complete and authoritative information. And this presentation reflects a few of my personal understandings and interpretations of the standards as a radiographer myself and as a practice educator in MRI, and any specific questions or concerns should be addressed by consulting the HCPC or relevant legal and professional advisors. But I shall try my best in my capacity, if you do have any questions towards the end, to also give you those answers to those questions. Today's learning objective is that by the end of this presentation, you'll have a clear understanding of the latest updates and their practical implications. So before I go ahead and speak much about the HCPC revised guidelines, just to give you all an overview as to what the HCPC is and what it stands for, I'm sure all of us know about it, but these HCPC standards, or the Health and Care Profession Council standards, were set, and they set the foundation for professional behavior and ensure safe, effective and ethical practice across healthcare professions. So it includes 15 of the professions that the HCPC basically controls or has authority over, and these standards are essential for maintaining public trust and ensuring high quality care. The revised standards came into effect, especially in the case of conduct, performance and ethics. It came into effect on September 1st, 2024, and much before we had a revised version of the standards of proficiency, which is unfortunately not food of today's topic. Key objectives would be ensuring high quality care, building public trust because we serve the public, protecting our service users, supporting professional development, and lastly, promoting equality and inclusion. Let's have a quick look at what are the standards of conduct, performance, and ethics, or what are the bigger banners under which we have those little subcategories. So the first one is to promote and protect the interests of service users and carers. So that's none other than the patients and the people who care for our patients. Communicate effectively and appropriately, which forms a very quintessential aspect with regards to what we owe to the patient in terms of proper communication. Work within the limits of your knowledge and skills and remit, which will again be you sticking to whatever is within your scope of practice as an MRI, CT, X-ray, nuclear med, or ultrasonographer. Delegate appropriately. So if you can't do something, or if you'd like your colleagues to do something on your behalf, you need to be able to delegate through proper channel in a safe way, respect confidentiality, manage risk, report concerns about safety, be open when things go wrong, which has a lot to do with our duty of candor, be honest and trustworthy, and lastly, keep records of your work. Now, whatever we're going to be addressing shortly are going to be subcategories or guidelines or standards under these particular big banners. Now, why are these important? Why do we need these guidelines of standard of conduct, performance, and ethics? So it sets out in general how registrants are expected to behave. Secondly, it outlines what the public should expect from their health and care profession. So if there's a patient coming, they can equate you and your performance with what the HCPC already stated there in terms of guidelines. It helps the HCPC make decisions about the character of professionals who wish to enter the register. So I'm sure we have a few aspiring HCPC registrants on the call today. So you will be acquainted with what the HCPC has already in terms of standards of proficiency and standards of conduct, performance, and ethics. And everything that you submit will be equated for parity between what the HCPC has said and what you've submitted. And lastly, they're used if concerns are raised regarding registrants' practice. So if things go wrong, if something has gone wrong during a practice or during certain malpractices, an example, the HCPC will go on to look into the aspects of what you've actually done wrong in terms of their guidelines that they've actually stated using the particular standards of conduct, proficiency, and ethics. So I haven't mentioned each and every standard of conduct, proficiency, and ethics, but rather I've taken the liberty to add only the updated ones. So if you want to have a quick look at the entire document, then I would suggest you go back after revising here and have a look at the actual document, which is on the HCPC website. So if there's a number 2 here, which I've put here, in that case, it means that there was nothing much that was changed on the standard 1. So standard 2, which is to promote and protect the interest of service users and carers. Under that, we need to treat service users and carers with respect. So standard 1.3 says you must empower and enable service users where appropriate to play a part in maintaining their own health and well-being and support them so that they can make informed decisions. So the word empower is of key focus here, which means that you need to be able to provide clear explanations when performing an MRI scan, for example, for instance, explain to the patient why the scan is needed, what the procedure involves, and how the results will contribute to the diagnosis or treatment. You need to be open to questions and provide information in a way that is understandable to the patient, allowing them to feel informed and confident about their care. And if a patient has a choice between different imaging options, ensure they understand the pros and cons so that they can make a well-informed decision. So that's the way how you can empower the service user to be equally involved in that decision-making regarding their scan. Coming to 1.4, you must make sure that you have valid consent, which is voluntary and informed. So from service users who have capacity to make the decision or other appropriate authority before you provide care, treatment, or other services. So in case you have a patient who comes in for a CT scan of the abdomen with contrast, for example, you explain that the scan will take about 10 minutes, during which they will receive an injection of contrast dye to improve the clarity of the images. And you are obligated to mention that this can cause slight discomfort that they may feel during the injection, and there's always a rare chance of an allergic reaction. So after ensuring that they understand everything that you explained, and if they are willing to proceed without pressure, you obtain their consent before moving forward. So this is a complete, voluntary, and informed way of you taking consent. Coming over to the third subcategory, which is challenge discrimination. So you must treat people fairly and be aware of the potential impact that your personal values, biases, and beliefs may have on care, treatment, or other services that you provide to service users and carers, and in your interaction with colleagues. So let's say if you find anything to be deceiving in terms of your eyes, you feel that you are not able to take a proper decision. It's only logical for you and legitimate for you to be able to pass it over to your colleague because you do not want to be taking that particular decision based on a certain bias or a belief that you have. So I will be narrating different examples as we go on. You must take action to ensure that your personal values, bias, and beliefs do not lead you to discriminate against service users, carers, or colleagues. Your personal values, biases, and beliefs must not be detrimentally impacting the care, treatment, or other services that you provide. So if you notice, let's say a colleague frequently rushing through imaging procedures for patients with learning disabilities, for example, failing to communicate clearly with them or neglecting necessary safety precautions, you would be obligated to raise this as a concern. Now, their actions might stem from a bias or lack of understanding, but the important thing is that their behavior could lead to poor patient care or safety risk. So you are needed to report this issue to a supervisor or a manager, ensuring that it's handled according to the organization's policies. And the last one, 1.7 states you must raise concerns about colleagues if you think they are treating people unfairly, that their personal values, biases, and beliefs have led them to discriminate against service users. So this could be something based on their own religious ideal. It could be something based on their bias towards patients or their inability to cater to certain patients whom they perceive to be as not the perfect patient. So if you ever see such things, and if you think there is a problem that impacts patient care, you need to be able to step up as a radiographer legally, legitimately, and make sure that the patient is properly cared for. Maintain appropriate boundaries. So you must consider the potential impact that the position of power and trust you hold as a health and care professional may have on individuals when in social or personal settings. You must take action to set and maintain appropriate professional boundaries with service users, carers, and colleagues. You must use appropriate methods of communication to provide care and other services relating to your practice. You must ensure that existing personal relationships do not impact your professional decisions. And lastly, you must not abuse your position as a health and care practitioner to pursue personal, sexual, emotional, or financial relationships with service users, carers, or colleagues. So I'd like to narrate a few examples here. So if you have a patient or colleague who invites you to, let's say, a social event, be mindful of any personal relationship that could blur the professional boundary or compromise trust. So you should avoid romantic relationships, for example, with current patients, as this could affect your ability to provide appropriate objective care. Another example would be if you have a close family member who requires an MRI scan, you must ensure that your relationship does not influence your clinical judgment. So you might feel that urge to prioritize their treatment or make recommendations based on your emotions, but ethically, you should treat them like any other patient, ensuring that your clinical decisions are based on their medical needs and not just because of your personal feelings. Communicate appropriately and effectively. So you need to be able to communicate with your service users and carers. So you must make sure that all practical steps are taken to meet service users and carers' language and communication needs. You must use all forms of communication responsibly when communicating with service users and carers. So what does this mean for us as a radiographer? So you need to recognize that patients and carers may have different communication needs and styles. And this could be in the form of language barrier. Example, English is not their first language. It could be a hearing impairment. It could be a speech disability. So it's your responsibility to take practical steps to ensure that these individuals can understand important information about their CT, MRI, X-ray scan, etc., and procedures. So what are the resources you could probably use? Some of you are already accustomed to using certain auxiliary ways of aiding patients who cannot communicate with you effectively. This could be in the form of a professional interpreter, for example, for patients who can't speak English, sign language interpreters, or other forms of communication support for patients who are hearing impaired, written or visual aids. So all these are examples of how you can step up in your profession and communicate with your service users and carers in an effective and legitimate way. And that is the way that the HCPC says you should be doing. Coming over to working with your colleagues. So you need to treat your colleagues in a professional manner, showing them respect and consideration. So a huge part of all the trainings that I do in my capacity is about developing teamwork and understanding human factors. So you need to be a close-knit team, collaborating effectively throughout your shift. And for this to happen, you need to treat your colleagues in a professional manner, showing that little bit of respect, offering them a little bit of consolation if they need it, a shoulder to lean on, all that is fine. Even a small cup of coffee could mean a million pages to them. So you must use all forms of communication with your colleagues and other health and care professionals responsibly, including media sharing networks and social networking sites. So as an MRI radiographer, what this actually would mean, or as a general radiographer for that instance, would be if you want to share an interesting case on social media, for example, it could be X or LinkedIn or Instagram, you must make sure that all the patient identifying information is completely removed and you have appropriate consent if applicable. So this consent could be two forms, but that's part of another discussion. Even if the content seems educational, so you might have done a very interesting educational case, you should be aware of your professional boundaries and show sharing such content could violate patient privacy. So you need to be very careful about that. And just sometimes even you anonymizing things would not necessarily mean that it's anonymized enough. So a patient could be identified from something that the patient is undergoing. So we need to be very careful and have strong boundaries. Another example, apologies, I had to go back to the previous slide. So when communicating with colleagues, for example, through messaging apps such as WhatsApp, I beg your pardon, because I'm literally in your shoes as a radiographer, so I feel the need to be discussing about WhatsApp, internal chat systems to ensure that the content that you share in there is strictly professional and relevant to patient care. Please avoid sharing sensitive patient information over unencrypted platforms. For example, if you're discussing a patient's scan results with a colleague, make sure to use a secure approved channel rather than casual messaging apps, please. A little bit further about social media networking sites. You must use media sharing networks and social networking sites very responsibly. You must make reasonable checks to ensure that the information you share is accurate, true, does not mislead the public, and is in line with your duty to promote public health when sharing information on media sharing networks and social networking sites. For example, this is not to pinpoint anything, but I've recently been seeing a few of my colleagues or friends on LinkedIn or whatever. So they've been sharing some very interesting things about what they've done. And clearly, they're very impressed with the results, what they've had, optimizing certain things, for example. But what you think is optimal might not necessarily be the actual reality. So always try to have an informed, evidence-based sense of practice. Refer journals, try to improve your research setting and your research focus and come up with very legit information if you ever think there's a need to share information. You must use media sharing networks and social networking sites responsibly, maintaining professional boundaries at all times in profession and protecting the service user privacy. The next guideline is work within the limits of your knowledge and skills. So you must only practice in the areas where you have the appropriate knowledge, skills, and experience to meet the needs of a service user safely and effectively. You must undertake additional training to update your knowledge, skills, and experience if you wish to widen your scope of practice. So all this has a lot to do with what Kathryn just explained. So it's about you choosing a career trajectory, deciding what you want to do. If you want to do something complex, have you got the right skill set? How do you attain it? What kind of practice or what kind of degree or what kind of course would enable you to do this or empower you to do this? All this needs to be done as a properly planned pathway with your lead or with your line manager. And only then are you supposed to do things which are outside your remit. So if you think you can't do something, you need to be able to refer it or delegate it to an appropriate person who has that particular competence. You must refer a service user to an appropriate practitioner of the care. So that's precisely what they're trying to say in the next guideline here. If you think their needs are beyond your scope of practice, so this person must hold the appropriate knowledge, skills, and experience to meet the needs of the service user safely and effectively. So an example is, imagine you as a radiographer and a patient needs a type of treatment or advice that falls outside what you're trained for, like a complex diagnosis. So instead of trying to handle it yourself by not allowing you, if there's a certain emotional or psychological thing playing there, please be sure that it's not worth the risk and the life of your patient. You should refer them to a doctor, a specialist, or a more senior staff who's better equipped to provide them with the help that they need. Coming over to managing risk You must take responsibility for assessing whether changes to your physical and or mental health will detrimentally impact your ability to practice safely and effectively. If you're unsure about your ability to do so, if you think something has changed in your particular psychological or your physical well-being, you need to ask an appropriate health and care professional to make an assessment on your behalf. So that's the ideal way to do. If you had a life-changing event, you need to be able to go and get an occupational advice, for example. You must adjust your practice if your physical and or mental health will detrimentally impact your ability to practice safely and effectively. These adjustments must promote safe and effective practice, and where it's impossible or not possible for you to make these adjustments within your scope, you must stop practicing. So let me give you some examples there. So let's say you've sustained an injury, you had a severe wrist sprain, which makes it very difficult for you to handle heavy MRI equipment, for example, where you need to lift heavy coils. So in this case, you should assess whether you can still perform your duties without compromising patient safety or the quality of care. And if you're unsure, you should seek a medical profession's opinion on whether you're fit to work or whether you should take time off to recover. Now, why does this matter? Continuing to work while you're physically impaired could increase the risk of your mistakes. So imagine you have a very frail patient who needs your extra bit of support to get off the table. So if you have a sprained wrist, highly likely that you will not be able to do the needful to get them safely from the table onto their wheelchair. So it's very important for you to not do that if you have a physical problem. Now, coming to mental health. Now, this is something that nobody can go inside and check for you. All of us are, as dedicated, sincere radiographers, we need to analyze this for ourselves. So if you're experiencing severe anxiety or stress that affects your focus, your decision-making capabilities or communication skills, rather than pushing through it, you need to be able to speak to someone. It's important to assess whether your mental health is impacting your ability to perform critical tasks. And this could be something such as interpreting scan results, communicating with your patients effectively, or even operating your equipment. So these are just examples of how you need to take the onus for managing your own health and work in accordance with the HCPC guideline of managing your health and being able to practice safely. Coming to the next statute, which is report concerns about safety. So you must raise concerns regarding colleagues if you witness bullying, harassment, or intimidation of a service user, carer, or another colleague. So this should be done following the relevant procedures within your practice or organization and maintaining the safety of all involved. So let me go again and do justice to this by enumerating or giving you some idea with an example. So imagine you're working again as a radiographer and during a particular scan, you notice one of your colleagues behaving inappropriately towards a service user, such as an old patient. The patient is so nervous about the scan, ask your colleagues for more information about the procedure, and your colleague, instead of providing reassurance, has responded with dismissive and condescending remarks, causing visible distress to this patient. And later in the day, you also witness the same colleague making derogatory comments about another radiographer during a staff meeting. So in this situation, all of this qualifies to be bullying, intimidation, and not adhering to this particular guideline. Your colleague's dismissive statement of the patient and disrespectful remarks about another staff member are all forms of bullying and harassment. And what is your role as a HCPC radiographer is that you have the obligation to raise concerns about this behavior, and ignoring it could negatively impact both the patient and the workplace culture. Now, coming to what is the action that you should be taking into task is that you follow your organizational procedure for reporting incidents. So you could do a datix, you could do an insight, you could do any kind of incident reporting system that's prevalent at your workplace. But as long as you've done that from a legal standpoint, I think you've done justice to this particular statement by speaking out. Going over to the next point, you need to be open when things go wrong. So this is something that we need to stress this as much as we can. You need to be open and have that openness with the service user and the carers. To forgive is divine, but to commit errors is human. So we are all prone to doing mistakes. But then What lies in us and what we can actually do as human beings is to admit that something has gone wrong. So you must be open, honest, and candid when something has gone wrong with the care treatment or other services that you provide. By where applicable, you could alert your employer, for example, if something has gone wrong and following the relevant internal procedure. You could inform the service user and where appropriate, their carers. For example, if the patient's not of proper capacity, they've got a carer coming with them, you need to let them know what's really gone wrong. And you cannot twist the facts. You need to be very candid, honest, and open, explaining the sequence of events that led to the actual problem. Or where you do not have access to these individuals, you need to make sure you report it to the lead clinician that something has gone wrong. Providing service users and carers with a detailed explanation of the circumstances in which things have gone wrong and what is the likely impact. And lastly, taking action to correct the mistake if possible, and detailing this action to the service user and where appropriate, the carer. And lastly, you must apologize to a service user or the carer when something has gone wrong with the care treatment or the services that you provide. I cannot think of a better example than a CT, an MRI, or somebody who administers contrast, a radiographer. You cannulate about 20 times, 30 times a day. One extravasation, duty of candor comes in there. You are bound by law and conscience to report that to the patient, let them know what has gone wrong in a very candid way, tell them the sequence of events, tell them what is going to be done to rectify the mistake, tell them what needs to be done once they go home, give them your particular form that you have in your particular hospital. If you have a certain paper format, if you have the practice at your hospital of incidenting that, incident it, make sure everything is done in the proper way. And that's the way how you can be open with your service users and carers. So to conclude, the HCPC revised standards emphasizes patient-centered care, inclusivity, and professional accountability. Digital professionalism, which is very much a very big issue these days, we need to take it up to task, and ethical use of social media has become increasingly important. So it's all the more important for us to embrace these HCPC guidelines and make sure that we act professionally, not just in person, but also virtually and over the internet. There's a strong focus on diversity, safeguarding service users, and being transparent when things go wrong. And lastly, maintaining your competence to continuous professional development is essential for ensuring your safe practice. And that nicely fits into everything what our education and career framework document by Kathryn and the beautiful work that the SOR has put together, and it's manifested on their website. Please do have a look, help yourself to some CPD, and always go back and check. Better be safe than sorry. And that's it for the end of my humble presentation on the updates. And if you do have any questions, and this is the time for questions and discussion if you do have any. Otherwise, thank you very much. I'm going to leave this right here for you to pop in some feedback. But don't worry, if you do have any questions, I'm going to just stop sharing and go back so that I can take any questions, if any. Thank you very much, all, and I hope it's been useful.
I think we do have a question from Sue. And how would you recommend using recording, reflecting on this session for CPD? Do you want to go first, Niall?
If you do have something in mind, Kathryn, I'm happy to take after that.
I think for the COR ECF section, I think it's maybe reflecting about what we've covered today. So what are there certain aspects that you might now want to go and look at within the framework, and maybe undertaking a CPD activity around that? So one of the examples might be you maybe want to look at how you're engaging with the 4 pillars of practice. So you can go to the framework, whatever level of practice that you're currently working at, and look at the suggestions and have a reflection activity around how you're engaging with the 4 pillars. Another example might be you want to think about career progression. So the examples that I covered around the knowledge and skills and attribute mapping. So that's something else which you might want to do. Maybe looking at the level of practice above the one that you're currently at to maybe gauge sort of if there's any gaps, if you're wanting to progress towards maybe working at a higher level of practice as well. And also use the case studies because they're a good source of sort of examples of how people have progressed in their career. So that might be something that you could look at and maybe do a written reflection around those. Hopefully that'll help.
Thanks, Kathryn. Thank you. Are there any other questions for either one of us from anybody?
I think in terms of the standard of conduct, performance and ethics, you know, you could reflect on maybe there's something that you've learned that you maybe didn't know. Maybe there's been an example of an interaction that you've had in practice that you, upon having attended the session today, you now think that you could have interacted differently with, or reacted differently in that situation. So that might be something to think about, embedding the standards of conduct, performance and ethics into practice, or maybe it's taking it forward and sharing your learning with other colleagues in practice as well.
Thanks, Kathryn. I think that was a very good way of, reflecting at their workplace as well. So in case you want to take these learnings, it's a very good way to reflect also by redoing this at your workplace for your colleagues, for example. And also make sure that something has been implemented, and then you go on to jot that down using one of the templates that Kathryn has kindly explained.
Just thinking too, Noel, there's something about maybe looking at what policies and procedures you have in place in your own departments and looking to see are they reflective of the changes that have been made to the standard of conduct, performance and ethics. So one example might be, does your department have a policy for dealing with bullying and harassment as an employee? So, maybe undertake a review of the policies and procedures that you have in the department and it might highlight that there's something that needs further developed or refreshed as well. That's also a worthwhile activity.
Any questions from anybody else regarding anything else or something related to CP or
I've popped a link to, at least I think I have, yes I have, I've popped a link to the framework in the chat bar for people to access it that way, and I will share the slide with you for onward distribution as well.
So if there's any more questions, I think because we can't really see any questions there, we're gonna leave it there. But I think Kathryn, are you happy for them to just pop you an email or something in case anybody does have
Sure.
anything in particular
Yep.
to ask with the ECF? And yeah, of course, you
Absolutely.
can
Yeah.
always get back in touch with me if you need any kind of adjunct to whatever I did explain. There's something there on chat saying something more in detail about CPD. Yeah, we're certainly going to work on a particular CPD session, probably again with the SOR, just to give you some idea about how you can jot down your CPD, what are the available resources out there. What if you want to do something in conjunction with CPD now, if there's something you presenting and all of that. So we're excited. We have that in store, Faizan Sheikh. So hopefully we can get that out to you in the next couple of weeks. On that note, I'd really like to thank all the office bearers of PAIR and especially Rajesh, Abraham, and everybody else. Got a big team out there. And thank you so much to the SOR, Sue Johnson, Kathryn, of course, Blue, Pandey, the entire team. You've been most helpful. Without them, this even couldn't have been put into place today. So we really appreciate all that work that you guys did with us collaboratively. Thank you so much. So we've got one more question there. What about countries which are still budding in the field of radiology sciences, where radiographers are still undermined as professionals? What should we do to make a reform? Would you?
I think this goes back to what I was saying. What were the drivers for change for us in the UK? So I think revisiting that slide, it gives you kind of a holistic view of the many different things that needed to happen to sort of get us to where we are today in the UK. It can be something as simple as forming positive relationships with medical staff and radiologists in practice. It can be sort of pushing the boundaries slightly to you know, get radiographers further within the field. It might be things like lobbying groups or potential government organisations that have a bit more sort of clout when it comes to recognising and developing the non-medical workforce. So hopefully that slide will give you an overview of some of the things that we have done. But again, it's just being an advocate for the profession and leading by example. And if everybody did that in practice, it would certainly help to make a difference and drive the profession forward.
Absolutely. Thanks, Kathryn. I think that's that's answer your question, Mokaji. Yeah, because I think still coming from a country like where myself and some of my colleagues come from, like India, for example, we still feel that we have a lot of we undermined as professionals, and we're not really given that kind of parity that we deserve compared to our other compatriots in the medical industry. So I think, like what Kathryn said, it's about building the right mindset, having a multidisciplinary approach, uh, trying to build on the four pillars of clinical practice, things like that, which could
Absolutely.
actually add that weight to our roles.
And I think something too about understanding of the role of the radiographer, because I think as a profession, you know, even we feel it in the UK that we're not understood as a profession, and it is a continuous fight. It's not that we're sitting back on our laurels and these things come easily. We do have to continue pushing and pressing and knocking on doors and championing the profession. Uh, Indeed, developing educational pathways. That's something which we're very much involved in at the college, and it's through education and training that we can ensure that the workforce has the underpinning knowledge, skills, and attributes that they need. Um, but you know, it really, from a fundamental approach, understanding, presence, recognition as well, promoting all of those things.
Absolutely. There's another question from Rubus. Hi, sir. Can I ask questions about the HCPC registration process? I'm not really sure if we can take that head on today, Rubus, but feel free to just message me, or you can always message us to the pair group, and we can always help you with the registration process and a couple of queries based on experience. But I think registration process is quite a niche topic, and the HCPC constantly revises its guidelines and stuff. But feel free to shoot something down here if you think it can't wait. But otherwise, you can always message any of us via the pair group. Absolutely, Sue. Couldn't agree further. Yeah, the ECF is a good starting point to promote standards. Yeah, so we we shall endeavor as a body also to see how best we can take it outside of the country, because there's a lot of countries out there really suffering, and they've got a strong workforce, but they haven't got something to abide by, really look forward to in terms of education, career progression, even pay standards. It's not at par with some of the other roles they've got out there. So yeah, certainly I think this is a good starting point for us to take outside and also disseminate our learnings. There's a question. HCPC plans to replace IELTS, for which some countries chose, and for English country. So Faizan, I think you're referring to the HCPC's planning to change it from, I think, Jan 2025, where they're going to have a new system. So they're going to have a couple of countries on the green light list, I suppose, where if there's 75% more majority of the population speaks English, then they consider that to be okay. But the list is not out yet. So I think the current way would still be the way it is. But the IELTS rule has certainly come into effect. So if you're a radiographer, you need to have an IELTS of 7 with no element below 6.5. It's not going to suffice if you just have a self-declaration anymore saying that you are from a English majority speaking country. So I think IELTS would be the best option for you till then. Does that solve your question, Faizan? Can you tell us anything about CAMRT? I think that's a little out of scope today, Sudhir, but yeah, you can always come back to us and message us on the pair group. Unfortunately, not on today's call because we want to stick to the HCPC and talks revolving around the HCPC, if that's all right. But thanks for that question again. Faizan's shot another question out of scope for the session. Yeah, that's right, Rajesh. So we can always address such questions out of the call. You can always get in touch with Rajesh, myself, or anybody else from the SIG, and we can help you with that. Um, Mandatory score for immigration for radiographers in UK. So I'm not really sure if there's a mandatory score if what you mean is a UK visa score, because that's based on your educational qualification, your credentials, which are compared against what they have here in the UK. So you could use a third-party provider such as UK NARIC, for example. I think they've relabeled themselves as another body the last few years, but still the concept remains the same. You need a statement of comparison, and you need to have an IELTS, which would give you those points, and then your work experience, your HCPC registration. But I'm not really sure what the mandatory score is for immigration, but it's a safe bet if you have all these things in place already. If you have your HCPC registration, an IELTS score, statement of comparability, and if you've done all that, I think you should automatically qualify for the mandatory score. Perfect. So Kathryn's kindly helped us with the statement of comparability there. So if any of
She,
you want to just go
yeah.
through that. Um, yeah, Manu, I think Rajesh and the team is arranging for certificates of attendance today, so that's an option. Yeah. So that brings me to the last bit. If I may just request all of you to share some feedback via this link. We will have a trace of who attended, and it's quite easy for you to generate those certificates for you. So if you are on your phone, you can scan this QR code, and we'd appreciate to have some feedback on how the session went today. And for those of you who do not have your phones with you, I am just gonna pop a link on chat. So this should enable you to give us some feedback today. Yeah, we are going to be giving you certificates, Manu. Yeah. Okay. So I think this is amazing. Yeah, thanks, Faizan. It really means a lot to have that good
Thank
feedback.
you.
But if you, thank you so much. Thank you all for joining. And it certainly has been a lot of information, but nevertheless, nothing is too much in our particular field. Let's feel proud that we are all radiographers and we've got a beautiful organization from the SOR with whom we closely work, providing all this wonderful supplementary information, guidelines. So, yeah, thank you all for joining today. We hope to be giving you a lot more of sessions and hopefully we can have them CPD accredited next time. We're a bit late this time. And thanks, Kathryn, once again. And thank you, Team
Thanks for
SOR, for
having
your
me.
kind support. Thanks for joining, all of you. Have a good evening.
Thanks,
Thanks,
everybody.
Abraham. Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye.